Well, how worried are you about the economy?
Well, we just printed $2 trillion. That's probably. I'm not too worried because I got out of the market about 8 months ago. I don't know why. I just had this feeling and I just got really lucky. I bought back in when it was low here, so I'm not too worried from my perspective. But outside of my household, I think that will turn back pretty quickly to being productive. People are calling this a recession, but I tend to agree with the idea that this is a. I don't know that if we should call this a recession,
I
right?
agree.
Because it's manufactured recession, and we just printed $2 trillion, and people want to go back to work. I do think there is going to be repercussions, but I think they'll be good for businesses in general because businesses will become more efficient and they'll find new ways to do work and they'll realize which employees actually weren't doing work and they'll not rehire those people. So I think we're going to see unemployment not go back to where it was for sure. But I also think we're going to see a lot of innovation happening in how companies operate, and they're going to use this as a way to modify and how they do day-to-day business. I think it's going to be awesome. We're in for a very productive next year as soon as we can sort out the loss involved. That's also interesting is the loss part of it. We're bailing out big companies. And I don't know if you heard I forgot what his name was, Shamath. Have you heard this guy talk?
I
He
don't
was
think so.
he's an early investor in Facebook, and he's saying let the airlines fail, let the companies, these big companies, fail, because his argument is that they don't, just because they go into bankruptcy doesn't mean that the employees all get fired and that the company
Correct.
goes away completely. He said they get reorganized, restructured. The employees end up owning more in the end. I don't know
I don't know about that, but maybe, yeah.
but that they become more efficient, that they reinvent themselves, and that there's an opportunity for consolidation. And that argument tends to resonate with me. I'm a
Yeah, I
little
mean,
bit.
what's who loses? It's the investors, right? Anybody who's got that stock, it just goes belly up.
Yeah, but the investors are the ones who've been, taking the market to new highs by leveraging and leveraging and leveraging. Needs to be a lesson. If we bail them out, it won't be.
Regardless of lesson, I think if you choose to be an investor, you take on risk, and this is one of them. So
Exactly.
I'm open to that discussion for sure.
Yeah, that's probably something we'd have to unpack. But or have someone on to help us unpack it, because
Yeah,
I
that
don't,
would
I
be
don't,
fun.
I don't know exactly what happens when a company goes into bankruptcy, and that what happens to their debt, what happens to their assets, how does it all work? It's an
Yeah.
interesting topic, but I do get the sense that the government has to stop bailing out large companies, and we have to let innovation happen, because when there's a void, say for instance in the airlines, certain airlines go bankrupt. When there's that void, others are going to come in and pick up the slack, and new things will be invented and new solutions will be invented from the rubble. And that reinvention, I think, is more important than just the steady state loop that people like to be in.
I am leaning in the direction of agreeing with you on that. The part that makes me hesitate is I think the economy might be a complex thing, and perhaps there's arguments I'm not smart enough to understand about why bailouts handled in specific ways are the best thing. I mean, imagine if you were on some big battleship somewhere and it took on some major damage, and they turned to you and they're like, "Hey, that damage took out the captain, and through a quirk of chain of command, Brad, you're now in charge of this battleship. What do you do?" Like, you don't know the first thing about what to do with a damaged battleship.
Right, but that's where the innovation will happen, right? There will be a solution for that. That's when another company is going to come in and say, "Okay, we're going to assume the role that was assumed by this other company before, and we're going to hire all those employees that used to work at the other company because there's a market need for it."
Or maybe there was some commission that studied this problem and a think tank that got involved and a bunch of academics, and they've, for better or for worse, invested a lot of intellectual capital and have a solution worth looking at that says do bailouts in this way. I don't know. I'm open to that.
This is the way I think about it, and whether or not this is accurate, I don't know, because the economy and such is a lot more complicated than life. Where have you learned the most? Have you learned the most in having other people bail you out?
Well, almost certainly no.
Right. It's an easy question or
Yeah.
easy answer. We don't innovate when we're constantly bailed out. That's what they tell you about people all the time. You can't enable them, right? And you can't
Yes.
create in their world. You can't make them do something they don't want to do. So let's stop enabling companies to run leveraged, to buy back their stock when times are good and then wait for a bailout when times are bad, right?
Yeah.
Just like people. We apply these rules to people, and people use this on the right all the time, is this argument that people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? And they should get a job, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
On the right, mostly they're the ones saying, oh yeah, let's bail them out. Where
Mm.
on the left, they're saying, let's not bail them out. Well, there's a little bit of mix there. I shouldn't say right or left, but I've heard both arguments. Well, let's not bail them out. Just like we don't, the right likes to argue we shouldn't bail out people, that they should work harder, that they should save for a rainy day. That's generally the idea on the right. And generally on the idea on the left is you should have a safety net. So
Yeah.
it's two interesting arguments, because in the bailout perspective, it's like saying, well, we don't bail out individual people for the most part. So why are we bailing out companies?
They're different entities,
It's
and we
true.
are bailing out their employees indirectly.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother topic too.
Yeah.
where where should we spend our money? I
Yeah.
tend to favor the spending of government money by more so the UBI concept versus bailing out companies.
Yeah, I'm somewhere in the middle. I'd like to, I'm open to UBI, but struggling with the concept, and I'd prefer something where government creates or gets out of the way of having mechanisms by which other people broadly can take advantage of those mechanisms to get ahead. So whether that's a simple one would be like small business loans. Let's make sure there's a healthy way that qualified people can get those, and that the qualification is mostly within reach of people who want to work hard.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and I say these things that probably need a lot of qualification. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We're just randomly talking, but for
Yeah.
instance, the small businesses, I feel like, deserve a lot of leg up here because they're a large portion of our economy. But it's once companies start to graduate into being big companies, they should have a little bit more capability to weather the storm. Whereas
Yes.
these small companies, these tiny 20-person companies or 100-person companies that are still growing and they're in their growth phase, they're providing a lot of jobs. So sustaining them for a short amount of time while the economy gets rolling, I can see that as an argument too, along with bailing out or helping people maintain, pay their rent.
If a relative who was like 20 called me and said, "Hey man, I need you to spot me 5 grand," okay, but a relative who's 45 and started a business and whatever else
Right.
says, like, let's have a conversation about this first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not loaning my 45-year-old friends money. If I had to do that, then I'd probably say they made some poor life choices, right?
Yeah. So maybe
Interesting.
we need to
Yeah.
have a similar expectation of companies.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the expectations are already sort of built in. That's why investors invest early, because they know that there's a lot of risk. And in
Yeah.
theory, when a company starts generating revenue, is revenue positive, the risk is much, much less.
But I can always play the unprecedented card as my get out of jail free
That's
thing.
true. Yeah. That's unprecedented. I guess one of the arguments that I've heard from the left was that these companies just did stock buybacks, billions of dollars worth of stock buybacks that would have allowed them to operate their companies during this downturn.
Yeah,
So
I hear what you're saying, and I'm open to an argument that that was actually the right thing to do. Maybe this is a bit of devil's advocate, but I'll prove the point in a different context. Let's talk about charities. And people often get offended when they hear, "Oh, this charity, they put on this $1 million ball and they had this band that they paid $1 million to come play, and it was all for these posh people." And that sounds really bad. Like, why is the charity spending the money that way? Why don't they help the people they're supposed to help? But if then you find out that they invested $1 million and raised $10 million, that's a $9 million profit. they should throw that ball more regularly.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a good point. It's the juice worth the squeeze, as my military friends like to say.
So that buyback may have been a financial mechanism by which the company says this is the best way to weather the storm. I don't know. I'm just trying to put something out there.
Yeah, also there's the other flip argument of, and I've seen this in corporate America, is that everybody wants to earn their bonus. The CEO and all the board members and everybody wants to earn their bonus. And in order to earn their bonus, they need to hit certain marks. A lot of times there's perverse incentives to increase the share price. And if the share price is increased, which often
Oh yeah.
happens when you do stock buybacks,
Uh-huh.
they get more money when their bonus time comes around. And I've seen similar things at when I was at Northrop Grumman, where it was very short sighted because they were chasing their bonus in 6 months. It was kind of like an annual cycle of whatever it takes to get that bonus, rather than how are we going to build towards 5 years from now? How are we going to build the knowledge base and hire the right people and maybe suffer for a year or two while we build out what will be a giant business?
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of interesting things that make my brain jump around on this topic from one side to the other.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I can spin myself around on these topics quite a bit because there is a lot of uncertainty. There are things I don't know, and at the end of the day, I just want something effective.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's something we need to explore when we
Yeah.
talk is how the hell do you make a
You know,
decision? And I think that was the first chat we had, was me trying to say, how do you arrive at the truth? And that's what becomes really difficult here, is how do you really arrive at the right answer? Because there's so much information there, and if you're able, like you are and I am, able to look at different perspectives, I could talk myself into almost anything.
like earlier, I criticized UBI, but if you came to me with a study I could believe in that said, "Look, just do this UBI. It's going to cost you $100, but you're going to save 120 in vandalism expenses because there's going to be less criminals smashing windows." Like, yeah, it's a net win. Just give them the $100. I would get past my philosophical objection, but that study, I don't know how I get convinced of it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Because then you start drilling into the study or the model that we, like earlier, we were talking about, and you start to find these assumptions that are embedded in there.
Yes.
Because there's so much, there has to be so many assumptions because of all the variables. You can't account for every single one, especially when it comes to human nature, right? How do
Yeah.
you predict human psychology? I don't know how to make a decision anymore. I really don't. I always tell people I don't really have an opinion on anything anymore. I just talk through it.
I'm in a similar boat, and it's frustrating when I'm able to identify the uncertainties. Like, there's so much more I could be learning about the COVID models and whatnot, but that won't change them. Nor is it going to change when I break shelter in place. So the value of that information is low to me compared to the or ascent I'd have to make in learning more epidemiological literature and all that kind of stuff.
Right. And even then, the epidemiologists aren't even that good at it. So,
Yeah, but they've got the best head start of anybody.
well, sure.
I
But
need to learn their ways.
my point is that I bet you could talk to epidemiologists who would have a certain amount of uncertainty as well and say, well, I don't know. And until they do. But most of the time when you know something for a fact, it's because you've reduced those variables and reduced the assumptions next to down to almost nothing.
Or you have a domain expert come in who has developed an intuition by some means
But
over,
then it's
a career.
intuition. Intuition is not quantifiable, right? So I think for today we should end on just the idea that we don't know how to describe or how to have a very specific opinion on something. At least I don't.